she ought to be able to get credit for college.
Yeah,
That's still school.
I will. My grandson goes to Cal Poly.
That's
I saw
all.
your sweatshirt.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Good for him.
One of my very good friends did. Went to Cal Poly.
Oh, really?
Didn't graduate, but
Oh.
went there for a couple of years.
Well, my grandson decided he wanted to be a race car driver,
Yeah.
so I'm
Why not?
hoping he'll graduate. We'll see.
All right. We are at the hour. Everybody ready?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Got it. Elissa just told me these things, and I was gonna
Audio.
ignore
video.
them. Record on this computer.
Recording in progress.
Do I need to start this thing?
Oh, yes, but that.
So do we have a quorum?
Three's a quorum. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna call to order this meeting of the Woodland Washington Planning Commission, Woodland Washington Planning Commission at 7 p.m. on Thursday, September 12th, 2024. First up, Elissa, would you call roll?
Tel Jensen,
I'm here.
Brian Matson, Sharon Watt,
Here?
Shauna Gothorn, Robin Zorich.
Here.
And that is a quorum, if just. All right, next up on the agenda is citizen communication for items that are not on the agenda. I don't see anyone to
Yes.
communicate with us.
But actually, I'd like to say something for
Okay.
the video, for people who might be watching.
All right.
So the grand opening of the new library is going to be October 12th at 10 o'clock. Or about 10 to 2, there's a whole lot of events going on. And the present library will be closing down on September 23rd. So there will be no service between September 23rd and October 12th. If you want to order books, you have to pick them up at another branch, etc.
What time again?
For the grand opening, 10 to 2.
Well, it's a Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. I don't see anybody else to communicate with us in person or online, so if that changes, we can revisit that one with the commission's permission. And moving on to second item, which is agenda approval.
I move that we accept the agenda as presented.
I second it.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda as written. Anyone opposed? All right, motion carries. Great work. Next up, our consent items are approval of our minutes from the August 15th meeting.
Okay, I move that we approve the minutes from August 15th.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Any discussion about that? No? Anyone opposed to the motion? Motion carries. Great work. Moving right along to public hearing. Oh, you know, I didn't
I know you didn't read that.
do
did you?
any of our, okay.
Do it now.
I'm just gonna,
That's all right.
I got excited. We're just having a great time. Backing up a little
Going too
bit.
smoothly.
Yes. I call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or a court. Don't think we're doing that today. All right, we got through the rest of that. So, moving on to item 4, which is a public hearing, opening the public record for our sign regulation update, which is Woodland Municipal Code 17.52, item 24-0118. And I think we will, okay, ex parte. Any ex parte communication? or conflicts of interest
No.
from the commission?
No.
No.
I don't have any either. Fantastic. We'll move on to staff presentation.
Okay, so my name is Travis Goddard. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Woodland, and with me is Maylene Garcia DeBord, who's the Associate Planner for the city, and Alyssa Brentano, who is the Permit Technician and the Clerk for tonight's meeting. The presentation that I have to give is a re-presentation of what we did at the workshop, but it needs to be in the public record, so I'll try and go through this quickly but thoroughly. So the reason why we're here today is because we need to bring the city's code up to date based upon a 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision called Reed versus Gilbert, Arizona. And the court held that a sign code that treats various categories of sign differently based on the information they convey, it violates free speech under the First Amendment. Specifically, that temporary signs, if they are treated differently based on their content. So we'll get into that a little more. But I quickly wanted to discuss exactly what we mean by content in this context, and that is information made available or material dealt with. And so kind of the difference between those is information made available is like information that you can find on the web page, on a web page, versus something that's material dealt with, like a table of contents. It doesn't actually contain the information, but it tells you what information is coming or is going to be dealt with by the rest of the document. So in that context, signs cannot be regulated based on the information they convey. And the most common examples for that for signs is political signs, ideological signs, or directional signs. All of those are an aspect of content when it comes to signs, because you can read the sign and tell what their position is or what the content of their message based on what's on the sign. So what can jurisdictions regulate? We can regulate the physical aspects like location, the number of signs, the dimension or the dimensional standards, and the types of materials. So I'll get into each one of those. So for example, when we're talking location, it can be like physical location on the ground, or it can be location on a wall, or it can be in a window, it can be on a roof. Location can be like in the right of way, or in a front yard or in a backyard. Another example is blocking sight distance or not. So those are all locational dependent for the sign. What we're going to talk about is on-site and off-site, which we'll get to in a couple more slides. Number is essentially pretty straightforward. It's a physical number of signs, one sign, two sign, maybe one on a building, one on a roof, or two total, or signs, one in a window or up to half the windows, so you can count how many signs there are, including whether there's a mix of sign types. Dimensional standards, typically height, width, and area. So whether it's a two-sided sign, a one-sided sign, how high can it be, how tall or wide it can be. We can also regulate based upon materials. So it can be as simple as the construction materials like wood, metal, cardboard, plastic, or cloth and canvas. But we can also regulate things like whether it's moving, rotating, or turning, and what kind of lighting it has, whether it's internally lit, whether it's front lit or backlit, whether it's flashing or has laser beams or LED screens on them. We can regulate those aspects because it's not content related, those are physical aspects. So the code that we're going to talk about is Woodland Municipal Code 17.52. It was originally adopted in 1979, had some updates in 2004, but that was 11 years before Reed versus Gilbert came out. And of course, it's been 9 years since then, so there's been some changes and clarifications. Specifically, the most recent one is the 2022 U.S. Supreme Court, which narrowed the decision that came out of Reed versus Gilbert. And specifically in this case, they're talking about on-site versus off-site. And that is, you can regulate, or you cannot regulate for content. And they essentially ask two questions, and that is, who is the speaker and what are they saying? But what this revised judgment said is, you can ask, who is the speaker and where are they saying it? Because where they are saying it is about location. It's not about the content of the sign. So you could have one sign that's on your property and it would be okay, but if it's one sign on somebody else's property, it might not be okay. So that is something that we can address now under this revised clarification. Now, in 2017, there's also a Ninth Circuit Court decision that clarified Reed versus Gilbert, and that is temporary signs, which is opposing duration limits on special event signs, as long as the regulations are content neutral. So even though one needed to read the sign to determine whether the regulation applied, it was again something that we can regulate for time limits. Now, for us, this is probably most relevant because we have special events permits in the cities, for example, on Planters Day. And we could approve Planters Day committee to put up signs associated with that event. And we could set that number, say if we wanted to have 4 signs or 10 signs. As long as that event is being held, those signs would be covered by the event. We would not treat them as signs under the sign regulations. So whether they put those sign up and it says, it's a directional sign that says, get your tickets here or entrance here, that would not be a regulation of a sign because it's part of the special event directions. They could also do sponsors and put up signs for the sponsor thanking the sponsor, and so that might be a commercial use, but we wouldn't regulate it under the sign ordinance because it's part of the special event permit. And another example might be if we do a Y racing triathlon or farmers market, that the farmers market could have signs for each of the vendors in their booths, but it wouldn't be regulated as signs because it's part of a special event permit. So that is okay for us to do, and we'll get to that later in our conversation. Now, we looked at existing codes that have been rewritten since this decision came out, but the question is, do we want to reinvent the wheel and look at what somebody else is doing and redo that? But instead, we just decided that we would look at 17.52 and make minor revisions so that we eliminate the content aspects from our code. But we are looking to make some format changes that are pretty consistent with making things easier to read. So we'll get into that tonight. The proposed changes specifically that we're looking at is removing all content-related regulations. We want to clean up the formatting, so we've been going through a concerted effort to replace individual position names like Public Works Supervisor or Public Works Director, Community Development Director with responsible official, because the mayor may appoint the associate planner to approve some permits and the Public Works engineering technician to approve others, but the code doesn't necessarily account for that. And there's some grammar and cross-reference checks that we're doing. We're clarifying some definitions and using tables where they add clarity. So at this point, no changes are being proposed to either the size or the number of signs, although we are going to raise some issues that the Planning Commission may want to make recommendations that change some of those, but at this point, that's not the purpose of staff's. So when we're doing our presentations, we'll point out a question we have for you as whether or not you want to weigh in on that and you're okay with it. So sign conversations that we need to have, this is the list we brought up at the last meeting, tables versus text, sign definitions, temporary signs, signs not visible from off-site. And there's some miscellaneous yellow highlighted sections in the staff report from the workshop that we're gonna bring to your attention, and we might get to some of those tonight. And we have 2 hearings scheduled, one tonight and the next one on October 10th, be a continuance of this hearing. And any questions about this presentation so far? Okay. So, without any specific questions at this point, based on the directions you had given me at the last meeting, we prepared kind of 4 compartmentalized staff reports. There started with 1 and then it grew to 4 by today. And they are essentially the tables staff report, which is just a quick synopsis of the foreseeable sections that we could eliminate, replace with tables. There's a process staff report. It's kind of the last 2 sections, or 3 of the sections that don't necessarily have a lot of substantive changes at this point. And then on-site and off-site staff report. And is there and the sporting packet was also, should have 1 in it as well. I just don't remember off the top of my head what it was. So do you have a preference on which one we start with, or any questions before?
Tables, because that seems easy.
That one will be real straightforward, real quick, I think. That looked great. So, yeah, let's do that.
Okay. And the other one was exemptions. That's the one that I had forgotten. Okay. So tables, this one is relatively simple. What I did in this staff report is I did a screenshot of the existing code. And in this case, this is for the commercial districts on-premises freestanding signs. So we're going to talk generally about 2 types of signs. Premises freestanding signs, like monument signs or pole signs. And then the second category that we'll talk about is on-site or on-premises wall or window or roof mounted. So if it's part of the structure or if it's a freestanding sign. So that's what these 2 categories are. And each one of them has essentially 3 parameters. One is how big can it be, how many can you have, and how high can they be. So in this case, this paragraph here, allowable area, talks about the longer the frontage, the bigger the lot, the more sign size that you can have. And the way this chart works and the way it explains it is for every 1 foot of frontage, so if your lot is 100 feet wide, you're entitled to have 100 square feet of signage. In the C1 zone, the maximum square footage is 100 square feet. In the C3 zone, it's 100 square feet. And in the C2 zone, it's 200 square feet. So if your lot is 400 square feet, your maximum, you would be over the sign limit, and that would curb how big it could be. And then a secondary frontage, so if you're talking a corner lot that has fronts on 2 streets, the second frontage would be a half foot for every foot of length. So again, if it's a 100-foot wide lot, you would get 50 feet of signage. And minimum in each case is a 32 square foot minimum. So signs on each commercial property will be between 32 and 100, or 32 and 200 square feet.
Now that's just allowable, right? So I
That's,
could make a 16 square foot sign if I wanted to.
yes.
Is that clear to everybody?
Well, it seems awfully big.
It is, but if you look around town and you think about the signs that are out there, I mean, that's kind of what our code has dictated since 1979. So the question is, yeah, it seems like a lot, but when you're driving down, when you're driving down 503 from exit 21, say, to the roundabout, there's a lot of commercial lots there. Is there too much signage? You know, your question might be, what about those flags? And we're gonna talk about that because those flags are something we're gonna have to deal with, and we'll do that later with temporary signage. So put that aside.
Is there complaints about it?
Occasionally we do, and when we contact them, they'll tend to take them down. But to be honest, I've dealt with this twice, and it was because the flags were looking frayed and crappy, and then they would just replace them with brand new signs. So I'm not sure whether I didn't get another complaint, but I'm not sure that necessarily meets the code or not. But
Okay.
It seems big to me too.
Yeah, that's, well, I guess 100 square feet's only 10 by 10, so. But
Big.
still,
Be hard to carry around this room.
be hard to carry.
Fortunately, we're not carrying. Anyway, thanks.
okay, and then the second table that we're replacing is the number of signs. And again, this is for freestanding signs. It would now look something like this. And Maylene and I are gonna get about the most efficient way to design those tables, because you'll see another example of how you can design tables in a later staff report, but this one includes highlighting just to make it easier to see in the staff report or up on the screen up there. So typically our code book would not have shading in it, so theoretically what we're just talking about right now is the general format that you're looking at and whether or not you like the tables better or not. And so the second one is the number of signs. In this case, in the commercial district, we essentially have two kinds of signs, and that is freestanding property signs versus a business complex. So if you think of the building next to Safeway that has the Starbucks, the Subway, the I think it's an AT&T shop, and the nail salon, and the last one is Papa
Pizza.
Murphy's, I think. Yeah. So that would be considered a site with a business complex. So instead of having, treating it like a single use, which would be allowed to have one freestanding sign, business complexes, if there's multiple parcels, they could have more than one sign, more than one freestanding sign. And then the next section down below that is...
So you're saying that if it's a business complex, they could have more than one freestanding sign, rather than one sign that consolidates businesses?
Yes. Now, that example that I gave you, they have a single sign with multiple boxes that
right.
they can trade plates out of. Another example, or a different example of a complex, would be the Walmart property. So Walmart has two pole signs, and they use them both. Everybody else gets sign on the buildings, but they don't have freestanding signs separately.
Okay.
So like the Taco Bell, it has signs on the side of the building, but there's no pole with the Taco Bell logo on it. So in that,
Is business complex defined somewhere?
it is. What's that? Yes, it is. There's also a height of sign, and again, this is 25 feet in the C1, C2 zone, 30 or C1 and C3. The highway commercial zone has a 35-foot limit, and if you have a business complex within 500 feet of the I-5 travel way, then you can have up to 45 feet. So those are the height limitations, and again, we're replacing this bulky paragraph with a streamlined table. And then down below, now we're starting to get into on-premises wall, window, and roof signs. And again, that's the paragraph. All of that information has been converted to the table. And it shows you the primary frontage of the building versus the secondary frontage of the building. So in going back to our case of the Subway and the Starbucks building, the primary frontage is the side facing the parking lot. So each of them have signs above their business. And then at the end of the building, there is a sign at the end, and it's the Starbucks logo. So that's their secondary frontage. So even though it faces I-5, it has only half as much per square foot of building. So if the building is 50 feet long, they get half a square foot for each foot. So they get a 25-foot sign. Whereas along the frontage of the building, if it's 100 feet long, they get 100 times 1 square foot per foot, and that's 100 square foot on the frontage. And they can split that up between 5 signs. They could, if they had one tenant, they would have one big sign and a medium sign on the side of the building. So that's kind of how they did that. Minimum and maximums also come straight out of that section up top, so we're not recommending any changes to that either. And then here's similar tables for number of signs. And so the last one here is businesses that have painted signs. And what sign standard says that you can have 1 per business or tenant with a maximum size of 6 square feet of window per business front. So in the Subway window, they might have a 6 square foot Subway deal of the month, whereas next door the nail shop might have a Christmas decoration or 50% off your toenails this week. And it can be a painting rather than a physical window sign. And we'll get into this later, theoretically, like Christmas decorations or Thanksgiving, pictures of a Thanksgiving turkey might not be considered a sign. So those kind of decorations, if they don't sell turkeys but they're just celebrating the season, that wouldn't be considered a sign. So we'll get into this later.
So do murals at all come into this? Because they might have wording on them, or not.
Yes. So the question that we are going to get to later, and that is it a commercial intent? So if it's not a mural about for sale or the business that's there, if it's a logo, it would be considered commercial. But no, like down across from City Hall, there's a picture of a man and a woman who are walking, and it's kind of abstract art.
Right.
That would not be considered a sign, because there's no commercial value to it.
Okay.
And then the next thing we do in this is we simply go through here and we, again, for the industrial district, pull out the on-site freestanding signs and then the on-site wall and roof signage. So I don't know whether you want me to go through these again, but essentially it's the main thrust of what we expected to do with the tables, and it's an opportunity for you to review and give us any comments, whether any of those tables make sense or if you have any suggestions for those. And then at the bottom of this report, the conclusion, so you'll find findings in each one of these tables or each section, and I just want to clarify, the purpose of a finding is to is for staff to express to you what we found based upon the information that was presented above. So, like in this example, the table includes the exact same information as the paragraph, and it's conveying the information in a more clear manner. That's fact based on this. Now, the conclusion out of all of these findings and using tables instead of paragraphs, the conclusion is that we will have a clearer code, but we are not making substantive changes to the policy, so that you could recommend approval and the city council can approve them, but it wouldn't make signage any more difficult, wouldn't make advertising any more difficult, it wouldn't change what they are currently dealing with in the regulations. So that's my conclusion, and I'm making a recommendation that you simply make these recommended amendments. And we had talked about before, sorry, I guess I should back up. We had talked about before, with the workshop, I gave you an ordinance with all of those markups. And rather than trying to tackle them a paragraph at a time, I thought I would lump stuff together to simplify it. So if you are so inclined, you can make a recommendation on these, and we will go back, take that master list, make those changes, and try and narrow down the issues to still talk about as we go. So my recommendation is that you approve using tables in the revised code when we do the ordinance. Any questions?
Just one thing I noticed, and so in the industrial district for the allowable area for primary frontage,
Sorry, finding what?
T6, or is it T7? I think it's T7.
T7.
Yeah, that one there. Okay. So table looks good. You handled the minimum a little differently here, and I think this is maybe a little bit clearer the way you've done it on this one than the way you did it on the other tables. But I wanted to ask everybody else what they thought about that. It's wordier.
It is. So Maylene has an amazing attention to detail, and her point was that the minimum, it's not a minimum sign size.
It's a minimum maximum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you have a really skinny lot, the smallest sign that you can, the smallest amount of sign I can limit you to is 32 square feet. They may want to put up a 6 square foot sign, and the code currently says they can't. They have to put up a big 32 square foot sign. And so Maylene caught this and pointed out that really the intent is to, if it's a long skinny lot, to give them at least enough room to work with, and that's a 32 square foot, which is a typical 4x8 plywood size sign.
Okay. Yeah, which that makes perfect sense to me. And you know, I think if anybody spent any time thinking about the other tables, and even though it says minimum, like
What's
I
that?
think probably so the other tables where it just says the minimum is 32. I think somebody would figure that out, but this one feels just a little bit clearer to me.
I'll add too that when I do my presentation of the on-site versus off-site, I re-looked at all of these tables, and you'll find, same information displayed in a totally different format.
Okay.
So in the end, there might be a combination of different styles that you prefer, but you'll get to see a different version of this, I guess, later.
Okay, great. The only other thing I thought of or noticed is C3, which is always on my mind. I'm so fond of it, though. It's so rarely actually exists.
Although with the RV park changes for occupancy, we may end up getting actually a usable C3 property.
Yeah. That's a different discussion, but, just with the idea that it is, you know, neighborhood commercial, to me, that would suggest that, you know, maybe 100 square foot sign is gonna a little more disruptive, intrusive, yeah, a little less conducive to the ambiance of a residential neighborhood. I know that's not maybe what we're talking about at this point. That is more of a like actual rules, but
I guess too on that, in order to get up to that 100 square feet, they'd have to have 100 square feet of
It'd be a big
building
lot.
frontage, which
Yeah.
would be a massive structure, and I don't think any of the current C3 lots are even that big.
Because you could even say the same thing for the C1 downtown core, because 100 square feet is a huge sign,
it is.
but all of those lots are 40 feet wide.
They're small, and you know, it's like our downtown commercial district, so it's, you know, it's not Broadway or anything, but like sort of like that's kind of part of the deal in
Yeah.
a downtown such as it is. Where it seems like it might be less the case in a neighborhood. I guess, yeah, it might be. I suppose someone could cobble together 100 square feet of frontage, and that might be an enormous sign. But okay. Thanks. I think just talking through that helped me. All right. Any other thoughts about these tables?
I like them,
Yeah, I think
they
they're
make
good.
it clear.
Yeah, much more efficient. Good. There's a name for this stuff. They're like,
I'm sorry?
it's good. Maybe it's just design. It's good design. Great job. Thanks. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So do you just quick question? Do you want us to make a recommendation like, for each of these separately?
Yeah, I think at this point I'd like a majority of you to indicate whether or not you want us to proceed with the energy it's going to take to insert those into the code.
Sure.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do I have a motion and a second and a vote?
Oh, okay.
Oh, you want it formal. All right.
I thought that's
You
what he
want it
was
to count.
asking, if you
Yeah,
wanted
I
a
thought
motion
this
or
was-
not.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out which way it was going.
I make a motion that we, pass the tables. Is that the way I wanna put it? I'll ask you.
Okay, I make a motion that we direct the planner, the staff, to proceed with WLD 2024-037 tables. Is that okay?
Recommendation? Yeah.
Yes, I recommend that we direct you to do that.
Second, I second.
All right. Fantastic. That sounds great. Any more discussion? All right. Let's call a quick vote.
Tal Jensen,
Yes.
Robin Zorich,
Yes,
Sharon Watt.
Yes.
Okay. Motion carries. Next up. Well, yeah, so where do we want to go next? What is the,
You want to do the process?
sure. All right,
Sure.
let's do the process. Right in order here.
So in this section, we're going to be taking a look at section 1752.020, which is the applicability. And It indicates that this chapter applies to all signs that are visible from the public right-of-way and built or altered after the effective date of this ordinance, and no sign unless exempted by this chapter shall be constructed, displayed, or altered without a sign permit issued by the city. This is a pretty thorough and succinct section, so I don't recommend that we make any changes to it unless you have specific questions.
No.
Now,
I don't.
No.
I will say that, this probably won't work for every single code change we do, but your table with the section current language and reason for change or deletion, that's very easy to make sense of.
The one issue that we will be bringing up to you for discussion later on, probably tonight when Maylene does her section, and that is visible from the right-of-way. And a lot of stuff can be visible from the right-of-way, but if you can't read it, is the intention to be read or effective or just be seen? Because you could argue that you see the front doors and you can see that there's a sign on the front doors of a store, and you don't know whether it says the hours of operation or whether it's advertising Mountain Dew Cold Blast. And is it effective, and do we have to regulate it because you can see it? You might be able to see it from a mile away, but you can't tell what it is.
So the right-of-way, is that any street, just the freeway?
Public right-of-way, so essentially
So all-
city property where we operate our utilities and our roads out of.
Okay.
So that'll be a discussion we'll have to bring up and hammer about later, but I want you to bear in mind that that's gonna come up a few times tonight. So the next section in this staff report is 1752-140, and it is essentially a couple sections that have to do with submittal requirements. And it just requires that signs get permits before they are placed, and you shall apply using the forms that the city provides, but again, we're making a small change that just clarifies that the form is provided by the city, and we're currently using electronic permitting system, so it's not actually a form, but theoretically it's a submittal application form online. So this one just needed a little bit of tweaking for clarity, but there's no substantive changes to that. Any questions about that part? Okay. Then section 150, WMC 52150. This one has a little more substantive changes simply because we are moving away from paper copies, and again, it's responsible official or the city will issue those, and we just reformatted it in a sense, so we added the idea that you don't need multiple copies because electronically it's all reproducible and transmittable without multiple copies. And then information about how the sign is eliminated or illuminated, and the type of sign. So we're just paring that down to, instead of 7 submittal items, to actually, it's simplified to say 4. So that's mostly just house cleaning to reflect changes in technology. And we did this with the subdivision ordinance where applicants were required to submit 13 or 16 copies of stuff, and the reality is they submit one electronic copy, and we don't need those multiple copies anymore.
On caribou hide. Okay. Yeah, this looks great. Uncontroversial, ready
Nope.
to move on from that? Okay, you want a recommendation, or you wanna?
Again?
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Try again, Robin.
Okay. So I make a motion of WLD 2024-037 process staff report go along with the recommended changes.
Okay?
Second?
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Let's have a vote.
Sharon Watt,
Aye.
Cal Jensen,
Aye.
Robin Zorich.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. Moving right along.
So we have on-site, off-site discussion and exemptions discussion.
Let's do exemptions.
Exemptions. Okay, so the exemptions from the sign code as currently written are included in section 17.52.130. And in this staff report, to try and streamline it as much as I possibly could, is in the list of exemptions, there are several that needed to be eliminated, either for content or because they were being rolled under another umbrella. And so those include A, which is residential nameplate signs, exemption B, which is signs announcing a process offered for sale for a limited period. F is campaign or political signs. Those are all content-related measures, so we're eliminating those because of the Supreme Court decision. Exemption G, which is public service directional signs, those are also being eliminated because whether it gives directions or not, we cannot regulate them. So those have been rolled into a separate exemption for public official signage. And there is an exemption that we're going to talk about later that says a public official can erect signs in the course of performing their duties. So for example, the Public Works Director can put up speed limit signs and directional signs and crosswalk signs because they're required as part of the safety responsibility and the public safety doctrine that's laid out in Washington State Code. So in this case, G, H, and I have all been rolled together because it's directional signs, signs for non-governmental nature, like safety or directional danger signs, like road closed signs, and then also traffic signs and signal devices. Those are all being rolled into the public official duties exemption. Exemption J is being eliminated, and the example that it uses is no hunting, no trespassing, no dumping signs. Those are content related, and so we can't regulate them. However, as Maylene will discuss in the next section, those are addressed in a different way. So you will still be able to have those signs, they'll just be treated differently. K is plaques and tablets like city parking lot or historical building signs. Those would be erected by a public official or as a public act, so they are being rolled in with the public signage section. N and O are also being eliminated for content-related reason, and those are limits on reasonable seasonal decorations, defining what's reasonable, let alone what's an acceptable season is content-related. And then the flag of commercial institution, so national flags and state flags and city flags are not considered signs, whereas if it shows a logo of a company, it would be treated as a sign and it would not be exempt. So those ones are just being eliminated outright, and unless you see or hear something on that list that concerns you.
As much as it can be, I think that they're pretty straightforward. Whole thing's pretty wacky, I guess. But yeah, no, I think you did a good job.
And I think as we go along here, if you have a specific type of sign that you want us to talk about, we can circle back and you can ask us enough questions. Do you feel like that we either know how we would handle that or need to add something?
Well, as somebody who puts out signs for the book sales,
Yep.
there wouldn't be any problems with those anymore. That's still,
So we will talk about that later. After consulting with the city's attorney, they introduced a new wrinkle which we hadn't discussed before at the workshop, and that is commercial versus non-commercial signs. And then also the idea that there has been additional case law which talks about acceptable public forums. And for example, the area, if you have a planter strip between the sidewalk and the street, that is considered a traditional public forum. So you could install your signs, you could install some signs in the public right of way if it's in that traditional forum area. But that is, whether it's non-commercial or commercial is a question we would have to wrestle with. And it may come down to a question of, do we want to create a special event, or do we want to would we potentially need the city? Could we create a process for the city to place those signs on your behalf as part of our public duty? I think that's something that we might want to talk about. Because another example is we have the banner that crosses, and that is a city duty to place those, just like the banners on the poles. The center has the veterans, the honoring the active duty or the veterans who've been killed,
right.
who are from La Center. Those are considered signs in the right of way, and I'm still wrestling with whether or not those would be considered public employee or public official signs.
Couldn't they just be exempt? I mean, is there some reason they can't be?
Yeah, and that's part of the question, because they're not commercial in nature, but they're not in the traditional speech space, or the traditional public forum space between the sidewalk and the street. So they're not in a planter strip, they're actually hanging off of city equipment. So yeah, that's something I'm still wrestling with, and I wasn't really prepared to wrestle with tonight.
Okay, so the other library-related issue is putting up a sign on library property. What the librarian is envisioning is some kind of sign between two poles for special events, for special things happening at the library. But it would be on our property, the library property.
That's an interesting question. We would take a look at whether it would be considered commercial advertisement, and then we would also have to consider whether or not the library official is a public, whether it has to be a city public employee or whether it can be anybody. Because you might have somebody who's I work for the city of Clearwater, Florida, and I'm here to put signs up in your jurisdiction, right? So.
But isn't there, or there should be something about the, kind of like the public good? Or,
That seems pretty content.
I think that's
heavy.
content related. Yeah.
But, we are within city limits and we are within library district limits, so, I think we could include the library without including Clearwater, Florida. It might be might be a little tricky, but I believe in you. These are good questions, though.
Okay, so the next exempt section that we're gonna talk about is exemption C. And I recommended some edits for it, specifically that it adds a subsection or a correction that talks about special event signs, eliminating the idea that they're time related, because we don't want to treat them differently just because of the type of sign they are. But instead, it clarifies that signs outlined under a special events permit, provided that the following conditions are met. So we still will regulate those signs based upon no moving, no flashing. They shall be erected and displayed for no more than 10 days before the event, and then it comes down after the event is over. So for example, if you have a Planters Day sponsor, you can put their sign up to advertise that Planters Days is coming, and then it will be up during Planters Days, but when Planters Days is over, all the signs would be collected and removed, just like we expect them to remove their tents and their garbage and their fair rides and all of that stuff that goes along with it. So that would be a condition of the special event permit, and it outlines the conditions that would go along with that special event permit if you're gonna get it. And that's different than regulating the signs or the contents of the sign directly.
So, can you make specific exemptions like the library or,
That is a good question.
or like for a school or?
Whether we might be better off creating a special event permit type for events like that. And it wouldn't necessarily be library specific, but it could be VFW event, or it could be the Moose event, or it could be high school sports events. If it's, because just like a special event could be for the triathlon event, or it could be for a summer football event at the high school, and they can get a special event permit for that. So it might be easier, rather than trying to push the sign regulation limits because of free speech, instead giving them a path to get a permit to do something else.
All right.
Okay, the next section I'm talking about is an extension of exemption C. After special events, there were signage exemptions for Christmas tree signs, or Christmas tree sales events, and that's all content related, because if it's not Christmas, then those signs aren't treated that way. Therefore, what the sign says is the regulation. So C1 would be kept, but C2 would be eliminated.
I feel like this should have like somebody's name attached to it. This just has the feeling of like somebody asked for this. A specific Christmas tree farm asked for this exemption in 1983 or something.
Maybe it could be named after you.
Oh.
Okay, and then the next one is there's an exemption for temporary signs on the premises that are for sale or rent. Whether that's quitting business, open for sale, or open for business for sale, those are all content-related signs, and we address them with changes elsewhere in the code that we'll be getting to. And specifically, we're proposing, the language that was proposed at the workshop is that we will allow signs on properties that are for sale. So they could theoretically offer their property for sale, and then they could advertise tractor parts, but it won't help them sell the properties. So, but that's something we're gonna have to deal with when we get to it, because the signage size is small enough, and like on a residential piece of property, it has to be an on-site product, so most residential properties don't produce products. So really, the only reason to have a sign on a residential property would be if it's something for rent or for sale. So we can't require that, but there's really not much use to a 6 square foot sign in a residential neighborhood, because it can't have off-site advertising on it. So.
Okay.
I suppose theoretically you could have one that says the Jensen family farm, but chances are that won't piss your neighbors off just because you have a sign that identifies the family that lives there.
I'm gonna push this code to its, I'm just gonna test it, push it to the limit.
Make sure you put Christmas tree.
Yeah, Christmas trees. I guess I should plant some Christmas trees up.
Yes, as long as you're growing Christmas trees on the site, I suppose.
It's a fig tree, but it's for Christmas.
Yeah, the Christmas fig.
Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And then we've a few more exemptions, E, L, M, P, Q, and R, which just need a little bit of clarification or cleaning up. So those are existing exemptions that we just need to renumber, because so many at the top move up. So we're just gonna do some slight cleanup and then renumber those.
Q is all strike through. Is there anything that's gonna change there?
Oh, yeah.
I figured that was.
Oh, so actually that's the new section down below. No.
There's some underline.
I may have missed something in the translation.
Okay.
I'll have to go back and take a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may have made an error in the staff report there. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty positive I did. Oh,
Don't let it happen again. You've built up a lot of capital with the planning commission, I think, so it's okay to spend that down every once in a while.
Although that may not be a big deal, because we don't have a theater in town. So if you look at that language, it looks like it says changing of type on existing theater or message marquee, freestanding and or building mounted signs. And I can only think of one reader sign in town, and that's just across from City Hall down this block. There's a computer company, or a little computer repair shop
Yeah.
that has like maybe a 10-letter, well, maybe 2 lines of text for.
Somebody could turn that theater back into a theater.
Well, I also, reading your language for new, it does seem like that was intended to replace that, because we don't have theaters, but we do have lots of other businesses that have panel changing,
Yeah,
you know,
and that's what I thought.
like gas stations and the prices, or
Basic, yeah.
McDonald's and a message.
Exempting, changing, replaceable lettering.
Yeah, because if you have a box, you can take that out and slide a new piece of plastic in there, and it'll be a totally different sign.
All right, I trust you all to get that one right.
so that was it. My conclusion is after looking at the exemptions, once we really eliminate the stuff that we can't regulate due to changes in case law, then we're really not making any policy changes in the exemption section. It is what it is. So that's essentially it. There's not a lot to the exemption sections.
All right. Here, Robin.
Okay. I make a motion that WLD 2024-037 on-site and off-site staff report.
We changed order. That's not the one we're working on. We're gonna back up to this.
It is.
Top supporting
No,
factor.
it's something about exemptions.
Yeah.
How about this? Do you wanna? You can just read this.
I can't see it. It's too far away. Okay, I make a motion per WMC 19.08030. The staff recommends the planning commission approve the code amendments for WMC 17.52.130 as presented in this report.
Beautiful.
Second.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the code amendments as presented in this report. Let's call a vote.
Tel Jensen,
Aye.
Robin Zorich,
Aye.
Sharon Watt.
Aye.
Motion carries. Great work. Okay. We're at 8 o'clock and we've got one left. How's everybody feeling?
Just well.
Plow ahead. Onward.
It'll be a quick one. It's very similar to the first presentation. But first, for a little context, the definition of sign is on the screen. It's essentially saying that signs are inherently commercial or they involve other advertisement to the public. So something like art or a flag or something that's not commercial in nature is not a sign and therefore not regulated by this sign code. So everything I'm going to talk about and everything Travis talked about isn't applicable to things that don't fall under this definition. The changes that staff propose that we're going to go over are all for increasing clarity. So that's things like turning text into tables, reorganizing things, adding titles before large chunks of text. There's one replacement of the term community development director, and we recommend replacing that with responsible official like we have many times before. And then there's also some irrelevant language that's proposed to be removed. I'm not going to read this to you, and you don't need to read it, but it's a screenshot of our code that it talks about how big signs can be, how many you can have, how tall they can be, and it goes in that order. It goes size, number, height. I personally think that the beginning should start with the number. I think that's everyone's first question is how many signs can I have before they're asking how big can they be. So I think in all sections, I only include one example here just because, like Travis went over, the content and the intention is really the same. It's just reformatting it into a table. So I'm not going to read every table to you, but I do think that they should all start with first the number of signs. So in this one, for example, in light industrial and heavy industrial, the standards are the same. Wall signs. It might be for building, it might be for freestanding, but that's kind of besides the point. So it breaks it down into a table that's just more clear to read. And then I included caveats, being a pseudo maximum, where if you have a lot with less than 32 feet of primary frontage, you can still have 32 square feet of sign. And then some of the other changes the black text is existing and the blue is proposed. Again, it's not really important to read this. I think more my point is that looking at that, you don't want to read it. I answer a lot of these questions on the phone, and I have to quickly go through, and I'm scrolling through the code, and without these titles, I don't even know where to find regulations about location or about separation or about landscaping, because really you have to read all of the text in order to find out what it's even talking about to begin with. So I think just adding a quick little, this is about location, by the way, if you're not interested in that, you know, keep going. And then there's also some irrelevant or not applicable language within our code. So like I said, we don't regulate signs that are not commercial. We have a lot of language that talks about signs that are directional or they're hazard signs, things like that, when really we can't regulate those, and so there's no point in talking about them within our code. There's also, let's see, some regulations regarding content, which again we can't regulate, so there's no point in breaking things down into specific content regulations. And then this last one is kind of a question to you. So in our code we do have a regulation that says that in addition to the number of signs that businesses in the C2 highway commercial zone can sign that's limited to 10 feet in height and 32 square feet in area, that can be an off-premise sign. So that means they're advertising something that's not related to the site that they're at. So it could be a sign at Walmart advertising Chick-fil-A. Normally that wouldn't be allowed because it'd be considered an off-site sign, but this code does allow it only in the C2 district. If we're going to keep that standard, it makes sense to move that into a table like the one displayed, but I also think it's worth asking whether the city should have that regulation in the first place.
Would it count towards the other maximum area?
No, it's in addition to.
I have to say, it seems kind of odd having a theoretically Chick-fil-A sign at Walmart's. Why would they want to do that?
I have had calls from business owners who their kind of primary goal is to advertise. So they have a commercial property and they just want, you know, because people pay for those kinds of ad spaces. So I think maybe a better example would be a business advertising some business that wasn't in competition with them. So a bakery and a farm supply store, you know, why not make money on advertising space?
Or it even could be in direct competition if you don't like your neighbor and you want to recruit their competitor to advertise right by their driveway.
So this doesn't involve content.
It does and it doesn't.
Doesn't,
It's
yeah.
that question of where are they saying it. So we can say that we can regulate content to the extent that with commercial properties, we can say that your commercial signs have to be related to whatever it is you're doing on site. You can have signs that aren't commercial in nature and we won't regulate those, but if it is commercial, it does have to be about your business on site, unless it's allowed under a regulation like this. Because otherwise our code prohibits off-premise signs.
So for example, if you had an office space and you're not worried about people coming to your office, maybe you do remote work, you could start selling your sign space to Absolute Vodka because they'll pay you a ton of money to put up alcohol signs on your property? And normally the answer would be, yeah, I can do that, it's off-site signage. But this code section specifically says you can do. Now, you might sacrifice your own square footage of signage, but if that's not important to you, if the revenue is more important to you, this section would allow you to do that. It's not common, but now that I think about it, it's a wonder why why people aren't looking at this more.
Yeah.
Just kind of seems like a odd concept to me.
It does, yeah. It's gonna hurt anybody's feelings just to get rid of it. Obviously, if you get calls about it, somebody wants to do it, but.
The only sign that I can think of that falls into this category is the existing non-conforming sign, the billboard next to Antidote. There's a big, because it used to be for the light, industrial light and grow shop,
Mhm.
I think is IGS, or what it used to, the sign used to say something. And now I think it's got a panel for fishing rods, and it may technically be an off-site advertisement that's existing non-conforming, but it's clearly an off-site advertising because they can rent it to anybody.
There was a rod shop there at one point.
Sorry?
There was a rod shop there at one point.
Yes. In that yellow building before it was torn down.
Okay. I'm inclined to say get rid of it.
You mean get rid of the whole table?
Just not allow off-premise signs.
Can we do that?
What's that?
Can we do that?
Well, I think in your motion, because this is a policy-related issue, and we haven't made a recommendation, we're just bringing it to your attention as kind of one of those outlier issues that is policy-related. And if you want to instigate that policy recommendation, I think you would want to do a separate recommendation for that.
And that was the last slide that I had, so.
Okay. Otherwise, the tables look great. We can also leave this one for another day. Maybe we don't need to get rid of it right now, and we can. I mean, it would be a shame for us to be like actually done with the sign code.
We
It's been
won't
with us
be.
for so long.
Well, we're gonna come back to you next month, so you're under no obligation to take action. Maybe you wanna hear the other couple conversations and include that in your final recommendation?
Okay, let's put a pin in that one. So we won't recommend changing that right now, if that's all right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But, yeah, everything, all the tables look good to me.
Section number.
Clear.
Yeah, those are good. Do we want to, so as you mentioned, the tables are formatted a little bit different than some of the other sections. Do we want to, I mean, it seems like they're all clear. All of them are clear in their own ways. Do we want to try to be consistent throughout the code, or is it okay trying different options?
Yeah, do you want to see those and pick which format you like, or do you want to just have us do what's more effective? Because one of the other things that occurred to me, and that is, maybe what we need to do is just a separate section for, number of signs. So rather than having a industrial section and a commercial section and a residential section, and each of them has a table on number, maybe we should just do a number of signs, and you can have this many in a commercial district, this many in an industrial district, this many in residential, and then instead of having 3 tables, we could just have 1 table with 3 categories. Might be the other way to approach that.
So I would say, what you mentioned earlier, Melina, is it Melina or Melina?
Maylene.
Okay, sorry, mainly. I apologize. About, getting calls and trying to scroll through this. For staff, is it gonna be easier, cause one call is probably gonna be about,
It's one lot in one zone, and I do
Yeah.
think it's easier if it's all lumped together, just because the rest of our code is like that. It is, grouped by zones, mostly because when we're trying to find something, it is in a specific zone, so I do think it might take more time to have to check 2 different sections of the code.
yeah, cause I was thinking, Travis, I agree with you, for me, and I'm not permitting any signs, I'm not trying to put up any signs. What you mentioned seems like I can see it all, the code, and it makes sense. But as far as when people who are actually gonna dig in to get information, it might make more sense to have it by zone.
Well, and so one of the other discussions we're gonna have, and that is, there is a general requirements section. And, there is a paragraph that talks about they can't be located where they block sight distance. And then there's another paragraph that talks about limitations on illumination. And then there's illumination section in the industrial, illumination section in the commercial, and illumination section in the residential. And if they all say the same thing, and all signs can't be flashing and rotating, then we might as well just put that under the general requirements section. And I don't know how much of that housekeeping we could put in the general requirements section, or do we want to keep the industrial regulations, commercial regulations, and residential regulations? So
Would it be too cumbersome to do both? So have, in the tables for the zone to have numbers, but then to have another section with just the numbers? Would that be too cumbersome?
Yeah, I mean, you could always do that, and it would be redundant, but we could also have the code and then just create a handout for the, that way if we have a handout at the counter, we can circle what's applicable to each person and have them walk out the door with it. But a lot of them aren't coming to the door anymore, right?
Yeah.
So,
I do think to a certain degree that it is kind of like what Travis was saying, because at the start of the code it says, here are all the things that are prohibited, and it says rotating, flashing, glittering signs, it's prohibited, and it doesn't repeat that in every single zone. It more breaks it down into how many signs, how big can they be, more the dimensional standards. But I do think it makes sense to keep all those kind of general requirements that are applicable to everything at the start kind of separately.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and I would definitely defer to you folks on this, because you're actually in it. All right. So, with that, are we ready for a recommendation on this section?
Okay,
I think so.
Go ahead.
okay. So I make a motion that we go with the recommended suggestions from the staff report for on-site and off-site issues, WLD 2024-037.
I second it.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Alyssa, would you call a vote for us?
Robin Zorich,
Aye.
Tel Jensen,
Aye.
Sharon Watt.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. Great work.
Did you want to make any motions on the off-site signage question in the C2 zone?
I'm inclined to wait on that,
Okay?
but can we
Okay,
resolve to revisit it?
okay.
Okay. All right. That's the end of. Okay, I'm not gonna close the public hearing because it's gonna stay open. The rest of this stuff doesn't really matter. So, do we have to keep it open to a specific date and time, yeah?
It is advertised for October 10th,
Okay.
2024 at 7 o'clock in the same location, so
Okay.
you don't have to do that.
We don't, okay, fantastic. In that case, moving on to, in the agenda, to number 5, is staff reports. Have anything else going on?
So I would like the public to know and to remind you that we sent you, the city sent a survey link. So if you get a chance to fill out that survey, then we would appreciate it. It's for the comp plan update and it covers multiple topics, and the consultant would like to leave that open through next Friday, and then we'll see whether or not we need to advertise that again and send out more information. But I pretty much emailed every email address I could find, so.
Okay.
And it's out on social media, and we'll push that out again tomorrow.
So is that our planning commission email or our regular email? I tend to forget to look at that.
I tried to hit everybody's planning commission and private email if I had it.
Okay,
Because I don't remember seeing it.
yeah, I don't
Okay.
either.
It may, I wondered if maybe spam filters caught it for some reason.
Oh,
I didn't see it either, but then again, I didn't look for it, so I'll look for it
I will check.
in both of those.
because I get
Let's see.
9 million.
So would it have come with you, from you?
It would have come from me.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. And that's it for the staff presentation.
So are you gonna resend it, or we just need to look for it?
Am I gonna what?
Resend it, or am I, are we
Yes,
just gonna look for it?
I will check and make sure that you all got it.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if we could all check our various emails, search for it tonight, and try to let you know
Okay.
if it actually showed up or not. Okay. Anything else from the commission? Any announcements? Scuttlebutt? Gripes?
That's not a good
All
thing
right.
to ask.
In that case, I'm gonna end the meeting at 28 p.m. on September 12th, 2024. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you.
For
Recording stop.